Welcome to DPC Pediatrician. We're Dr. Phil Boucher
and Dr. Marina Capella, two DPC pediatricians who are on a mission to share our love of direct primary care with you.
Welcome back to another episode of DPC Pediatrician. Thanks for joining us. Today we're going to work to answer the question of how do I prepare to leave my fee-for-service practice in order to open up my own pediatric DPC. Now, I personally don't have much experience with that because I switched over from pediatric urgent care to DPC, right. But Phil, you have experience with leaving a fee-for-service practice where you are a partner for
right.
DPC. So I'd love to ask you questions on this episode about how you did that. So where did you even start that process? What did you have to think about?
So I was a partner, like a owner of a pediatric practice with about 10 other pediatricians. And so there's lots of like layers to partnering, like going through a divorce, I'm sure would be like.
Yeah.
When it comes to, okay, where do you even start? Well, I mean, the first thing, like the very first thing that I tell pediatricians when I'm talking with them, whether they're employed, whether they're an owner, whether there's something else in where they work with their, whoever employs them as a pediatrician, is to get a copy of your contract. Because a lot of people sign the contract and it's probably sitting in a folder in some drawer, or it's in your Gmail or somewhere like that. And you don't even think about it anymore because it's been years. And when you sign the contract, you were never thinking about leaving. So the most important thing to do is get an actual copy of your contract. If you're afraid, like that's going to throw up all the red flags for your employer, the way that I would do it is I would say, like, you literally might not have a copy of your contract, especially one that's actually been like signed by all parties, because usually they hand it to you, sign it, they put it in a drawer or something like that. You might have had a provisional copy, but not one that's not actually signed. I would say, hey, we're updating our will with our attorney and we just need to get all of our employment contracts. Do you have a copy of my contract that I can send to my attorney to have on file for our will and everything like that? Because that's a legitimate reason to need a copy of your contract, because if you were to die, like somebody has to figure out how it works with your getting out of your employer and all those sorts of things. Like that's a legitimate reason that doesn't raise the red flags of, hey, I just wanted a copy of my contract. Like I'm kind of curious about the non-compete portion of that. So get a copy of your contract. That is first and foremost the most important thing, so that you actually know what's spelled out. And there's two really important things in there. One is how much time you have to give them. And two is the non-compete. And those are the two biggest things where pediatricians feel like, okay, I really don't know what is going to happen here. I don't know if it's 90 days or if it's 6 months or 1 year. And I don't know what the non-compete says because I didn't think that was going to be an issue down the road. Those are the two main things that you need to secure, is the knowledge of this is what it looks like when it comes to how much notice I need to give. And this is how much notice, or this is what the non-compete looks like, because those are the two biggest things that are going to come up as you prepare to open.
Excellent. Yeah. Okay. So once you have a copy of your contract, how do you make sense of it? Because as we know, legal language can be quite complex and difficult to interpret in terms of, okay, what's the practicality of this? What does this mean for me trying to leave the practice? Did you work with a lawyer or someone else to figure that out?
Absolutely. It is well worth your time and money to work with an attorney, because there are such contract nuances in there that you, no matter how much training you have as a doctor and how smart you are, do not understand all of those little legalese terms and conditions. And it is not worth your time to try and do it. And honestly, there's been a few train wrecks in the DPC groups that I've seen where people assumed based on their reading of it that they were okay. And then their practice went after them and they like had to close, or they had to move to a further distance because they just assumed that everyone would play nicely, assume that they won't play nicely. And so have an attorney that can say, this is what you signed, this is where we're at, and this is what we need to do to make sure that you are not in breach of your contract. Because oftentimes, especially if you are an owner or a partner in a practice, there's money to untangle as well. And so you don't want to put that at risk, like the money that you're due either in accounts receivable or as your buy-in and your buyout and all of those sorts of things, because you just said, well, I read the contract and this is my interpretation of it. Spend the $500, spend the $1,000, spend the $2,000, whatever it is, to have that attorney give you that peace of mind and know that you're doing everything within your contract. And it is well worth your money to do it on the front end, especially if you make it clear that you have representation, like they're going to back down a little bit and be like, well, we're not going to be able to pull a fast one because they already have somebody that's representing them. Those are important things to just keep in mind and to make sure that you get the legal support that you need. I would think of it like, oh, well, we're going to do an appendicitis. This kid's pretty sleepy. We probably don't need anesthesiology. They'll probably be fine. No, no, no. You want the
Uh-huh.
anesthesiologist there for the appendectomy, even in the sleepy kid. Really dumb analogy, but you want the attorney to be there by your side as you go through leaving your fee for service practice, whatever the setup is.
Yeah. Was it a good situation financially for you? Because I have a friend who's leaving her fee for service practice, and she says that just reimbursements have become so difficult over the time that she didn't get as much out of it as she had hoped. So, did it end up being okay for you?
Yeah, it ended up being fine for me. I mean, making sure that I didn't breach my contract and then put all of the accounts receivable and those things at risk was really
Yeah.
important and worthwhile from a financial standpoint. I wouldn't anticipate a lot of like financial windfall from leaving the practice because
Yeah.
it can be really expensive these days to run for a fee for service practice. And
Mhm.
so I would just look at any of that as kind of bonus money, gravy money that you might be coming into as you exit. But that's another good reason to have an attorney that can tell you this is what you're due, this is how they calculate what's due to you. Because the
Mhm.
thing about the fee for service practice is there's a lot of money sitting there in accounts receivable. How does that work when insurance pays you like for your services after you've left? Or do you have to wait a certain amount of time to figure that out? Like, not everybody pays their bill. What about the kid that you saw 3 months ago that had strep throat that was a 99214 that doesn't pay their bill? Like, how does that money actually reach you? Well, there's
Yeah.
formulas that should be in the contract that spell that out of what you should expect to get when you leave. And it's not worth your time trying to figure all that out. It's important
Uh-huh.
that somebody is figuring that out for you, whether it be the attorney and then working with an accountant, whatever that might be, to make sure that you get what you're due and you're not having to try and run those reports yourself to figure that out.
Gotcha. Okay. So once you got your contract, you worked with the lawyers to figure things out, what it would look like or what it should look like. How did you break the news to your partners in the practice?
A resignation letter that I put on each of
Okay.
their desks. Yeah. I think one of the things that will come as a surprise to you is how replaceable you as a pediatrician are, whether you are employed, whether you're a partner or anything along those lines. And I don't say this to like put a lot of dark clouds over it, but
Mhm.
they're going to move on with the business and you're not going to be a part of it anymore. And so you can't expect them to like be your friends or throw you a goodbye party if you're leaving
Yeah.
and you're going to go do something that, to be honest, they're probably going to be jealous of when they see the lifestyle and the way that you get to care for patients. So I would
Uh-huh.
assume that they're not going to throw you a goodbye party and buy you a big cake and let
Uh-huh.
that concept trickle down to all of the ways that you're going to interact with them. But by the time that you give them your notice and you say you're going to leave, and I mean, the best thing that can happen is they could be super excited for you and give you high
Uh-huh.
fives and send patients to you and all those things. The worst thing is they can make it really challenging to leave and make lots of headaches and lots of drama. And so if you assume that there's going to be lots of headaches and lots of drama and prepare yourself in that way, then at
Mhm.
least it can't be any worse than you predicted. Like there's a stoic concept of premeditatio melorum, which is like plan for bad things. I actually have, there's like a little stoic coin that says
Uh-huh.
that, and it says all of the terms of our human lot should be before our eyes. And then around
Uh-huh.
that, it says exile, torture, shipwreck, famine. Like if you're
Ah,
prepared for those things, then the worst
yeah.
thing that can happen is shipwreck. And then,
Ah,
okay, I'm prepared for a shipwreck. Here's what's going to happen if there's a shipwreck. I already know what I'm going to do. So if you prepare for the bad thing, then if it happens, then I was prepared for it. And then anything better is just, well, great. They threw me a going away party. Lovely.
yeah, yeah.
What that
It's
looks
like
like when
the
you're actually telling them is
yeah.
to make sure you have your ducks in a row. Because if you know I have to give them 90 days notice, well, I'm not going to give them 97 days notice. I'm probably going to give them 90 or 91 days notice so that there's
Uh-huh.
only so much malfeasance that could occur in that last time together. And at the worst, they could say, well, we are going to just let you go right now. And you can
Mhm.
just pack your bags and go. And that could happen. I mean, they might breach the
Yeah.
contract if that happens, which is another good reason to have your attorney on board.
Mhm.
But okay, well, they said sayonara and cut me loose. And so now I can get started on my practice. And here's what that means from a legal perspective. all of those sorts of things. So it was just a letter that I put on their desk. I also did not get into the specifics of my specific plans or the model or anything like that. I'm leaving the business, period. You don't have to go into the depths of why you're doing it or the things that you want that they can't offer. Like, they will decide how much they care about that. And I'm probably sounding really jaded. I'm not really
Yeah.
jaded about it, but I do try and prepare pediatricians in advance. Like, this is the worst thing that could happen, so that hopefully the worst doesn't happen. But at least if it does, then they're not totally taken by surprise when the people that they worked with and cared about and spent time with move on from them before or to a greater extent than they were expecting.
Yeah. No, I think that's really sage advice, prepare for the worst and hope for the best, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, you should be prepared for all possible circumstances. That's going to position you in the best possible place, whatever happens. Yeah. So, how did your practice react? How was that transition for you? Were there any surprises for you of anything you had to give up or any sacrifices you had to make in making that transition?
I honestly probably can't get into all the specifics of it from a
Sure.
legal perspective,
That's
but
fine.
it went about as I expected. It wasn't
Yeah.
worse than I expected, but it wasn't that great of a 6 months because
Hmm.
I gave more notice than most do, in part because I was a partner, in part because like the writing was on the wall that this was the right move for me to make. And
Hmm.
then we agreed on the timeline together of like how soon I would leave. A week after I put my letter of resignation on their desks, we had a planned premature delivery of our sixth kid.
Oh,
And then 3 months after that, we moved into a new house that we had been building. So there was
I know.
stress and layer upon stress and layer. So it was a
Hmm.
difficult time period. It wasn't
Hmm.
worse than I had expected, though, but my expectations were pretty low at that point of how things would go.
Hmm.
I think for me, that's probably all that I can or want
Yeah,
to
that's
get
okay.
into.
That's
Like, reliving traumatic
yeah,
experiences isn't that much
that's
fun. And
smart.
so let me just tell you that the other thing that you should do is prepare your spirit for that by
Hmm.
having, good self-care practices or a therapist or at least a good
Hmm.
support network around you that can help
Yeah.
you as you make those transitions and people do things that you didn't expect based on your previous years of co-employment and working together and caring about each other. So I
Hmm.
mean, I think those are like lessons learned from that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, thanks for sharing that because I do want people to have eyes wide open about the possibilities. I mean, this is like you said, it can feel like a divorce of sorts, right? And that's very real, especially if you're leaving as a partner. Do you have any advice for people who are leaving fee for service, but maybe not as a partner, but just as an employee?
Yeah. I think assume that the hospital okay, this is a really Debbie Downer podcast. I'm sorry.
No, it's
Assume that the
not. It's very
hospital
realistic.
assume that the hospital won't be super excited about telling your patients where you're going because it doesn't serve them well to just give up all these patients and all the RVUs that come from all of these patients. And so if you're employed by someone, assume that they're not going to send you off with a bunch of patients under your belt, that they're just going to say like, he's moving here, here's his website, here's how to book an appointment with him. Assume it will be your case has been reassigned to Dr. So and so effective this date, and that's all you're going to get from them. And so, what
Uh-huh.
that means, whether you're a partner or whether you're in a fee for service model where you're employed, make sure patients know how to find you. And so,
Mhm.
in addition to like the first step being to get your contract, is figure out a way that you can, within the bounds of your contract, make sure patients know where to find you. The easiest way to do this, which I think just helps you to develop this skill set around marketing too, is if you have an online presence where you talk about pediatric topics. Here's what's going around the community. Here's how to start peanut butter with your 6 month old. Here's what to know about autism. Here's what to know about an upcoming flu vaccine or whatever it might be. If you can
Mhm.
establish like a little bit of a marketing channel presence that's not like, follow me, here's my new practice, here's all the things that went wrong with my old practice. It's not that. It's simply,
Uh-huh.
here's a lot of good information that I want to provide as an educational opportunity for my patients and for our local community. If you can establish that, then you can say, hey, I know you had asked about starting peanut butter with your baby. Here's what to do. Also, I just put something on my Instagram about the way that we did it at our house. Then patients will naturally find you on those channels. And then when they get that letter and it says Dr. Boucher is no longer here, your case has been reassigned to so and so, they're going to knee-jerk response of, well, I'm going to go figure out what happened or figure out what's going on. Mostly because I liked him and I want him to still be my pediatrician, but it's kind of weird to get a letter in the mail saying that he's no longer in practice there. What's the deal? I'm kind of, curious about what's going on there. And then they'll go and find you and they'll find, oh, well, he's still putting out content. He's still putting out information. And it looks like he started this new practice. And I'm going to go check it out and learn more because I liked him. And, he seemed like a reasonable guy. I wonder what's going on or if he must be doing something cool. So if you can have a way that's not advertising and it's not salesy for patients to find you and connect with you before that time, then great. It might be, you might like video, you might like doing Substacks, you might like putting together whatever sort of ways that you can serve in the community and provide that good information. But if you can have that pillar set up as you're getting ready to depart, then it will only serve you to make your patients be able to find you more easily and then find out about your model and things like that. And maybe the practice is overflowing and they don't want those patients anymore and they want to have them all follow you, and great, but I would assume that they're not going to be super gung-ho about you starting some competitor to them that provides things that they can't provide, and that they're not going to be super excited to share that by at large that you're moving on and here's how to find him and all those sorts of things.
Yeah. I've heard other pediatricians who leave employed positions say that they're not allowed to tell their patients where they're going, but they can say something generic like, look me up online, right?
Right.
And so that's where it's important to, establish your Google profile or have some sort of presence where if people look for you, they can find you, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Like in this day and age, when you see something on the news or you hear about a new business or a business going out of business, you're going to look them up. Like you're going to have that curiosity and you're going to go to Google, you're going to go to social media and type in their name. And then like, it's not hard to have that presence so that when people Google you, they find you. And so making sure that you're able to get a handle on that and get like your Google profile to yourself. So it's not owned by your practice, like your name, Phil Boucher, MD is your intellectual property. So you can get that Google My Business and disconnect it from the practice that you were at. You can have those social media channels and those sorts of things. Just talk with your attorney because you want to make sure that you're not doing anything that's going to jeopardize your leaving. But there are plenty of ways to put yourself out there in the community that people will know where to find you when they get that letter.
Yeah, excellent. All right. Thank you. Thanks so much for sharing your experience, your story, at least as much as you could. I don't think this is a downer episode. I think this is please go into this with eyes wide open and knowing what you need to do to make it successful, right? And so to kind of summarize, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, like, when you see the non-compete too, that was the other thing that we didn't really get into much. Talk with your attorney about what that non-compete means. If it says you can't practice within 20 miles, don't assume that if it's 19.4 miles that no one's going to be bothered by it. We had conversations like this at the mastermind too, where practices went after doctors. Like they have the time and they have the resources and they have the attorneys to make it really hard for you. And so take them at their word or figure out how to adjust things legally from a legal standpoint that then protect you. Assume that all those things are in place and assume that they actually mean what they say. And it's not like, I know they said 20 miles, but their kids were at my kid's birthday party last weekend. They'll totally understand. I mean, in theory, like we would all hope that people would be like that. But when it comes to the legal business, there's often not those warm, fuzzy feelings. Like it is just 7 pages of text that are really going to determine your future. Now, it's also important when you're talking about non-competes, not to assume that because you saw something on the news or on a Facebook group that non-competes aren't enforceable in this state or that state. Like actually talk with your attorney and find out if that is the case rather than relying on a Medscape article that you saw or a Facebook post where somebody was able to do this or that. Get the actual attorney's opinion and their expert advice before you make decisions that are kind of in the gray area of your contract.
Yeah, definitely. I used to live in California where hospital systems still write non-competes into the contracts, but they're allegedly not enforceable. But even then, they can still threaten to harass you, basically. Like, and you can end up wasting a lot of time and emotion and energy in that process. So, yeah, I would say even in states where it's not enforceable, you can't just brush it off, right? You have to be careful about that.
Right.
Excellent. Well, to summarize some of the things you've said today, look at your contract with an attorney very carefully, including that non-compete clause. Make sure that you tell your patients how they can find you within the constraints of your contract. And also sometimes, prepare for the worst and hope for the best. So
Yeah,
thanks so much, Phil, for sharing your experiences to the extent that you could.
you bet.